She had landed just 2 days earlier after months overseas. The long flight still lingered in her bones, but she refused to let it slow her down. Being home, even for a short visit, mattered more than sleep. She had spent decades serving her country, leading thousands of men and women through hard assignments. Yet on this quiet afternoon, she was simply a daughter stopping by to see family and pick up a few things from a small neighborhood store. She wore jeans, a plain sweater, and comfortable shoes. No medals, no uniform, no visible sign of rank. Her short hair was neatly styled, and her posture, as always, was straight and confident. Years of discipline shaped the way she walked and spoke. Even when relaxed, there was something steady about her. The neighborhood store was calm. A few people moved through the aisles. A soft hum from the refrigerators filled the air. She grabbed a basket and picked up simple items: fruit, bread, a few household supplies. She smiled politely at a woman who moved her cart aside. The woman nodded back, though her eyes lingered a second too long. At the checkout counter, she paid and thanked the cashier. Everything felt normal, ordinary, peaceful. Outside, the afternoon sun was bright but gentle. She placed her bags in the trunk of her car. That was when she noticed a man standing a few spaces away, watching her. She didn't think much of it at first. People look at each other all the time. But as she closed her trunk, he approached slowly. "Is that your vehicle?" he asked. She turned to him calmly. "Yes, it is." He glanced at the car, then back at her. "You live around here?" She gave a polite but firm answer. "I'm visiting family." He nodded, though his expression showed doubt. Without another word, he stepped back and pulled out his phone. She could hear him speaking quietly, though she couldn't make out the details. She didn't want trouble. She had handled far more serious situations in her career. She had negotiated in tense rooms and made decisions that affected thousands of lives. A parking lot conversation did not concern her. She opened her car door and sat inside for a moment, organizing her thoughts. Within minutes, she noticed a patrol car entering the parking lot. Then another. She took a slow breath. 2 officers stepped out. One rested a hand near his belt as they approached. The other scanned the area, eyes sharp. "Ma'am," the first officer said, his tone already firm, "we received a call about suspicious activity." She stepped out of the car slowly, keeping her hands visible. "Suspicious activity?" "Yes," he replied. "We need to see some identification." "Of course," she said calmly. "May I reach into my bag?" The second officer nodded stiffly. Slowly, she moved carefully, aware of how easily normal actions could be misunderstood. She had trained soldiers on this very principle. Stay calm, move slowly, communicate clearly. She retrieved her wallet and handed over her ID. The first officer examined it. His expression did not soften. "Are you sure this is your vehicle?" he asked again. She met his eyes, steady but respectful. "Yes, officer. It is registered under my name." The second officer walked around the car, checking the license plate. A small crowd began to form at a distance. Some shoppers paused, watching. A few held up their phones. The first officer's voice grew sharper. "Step away from the vehicle." She blinked, surprised but compliant. "Is there a problem?" "We'll ask the questions," he said. She stepped back, hands open at her sides. Her heart beat a little faster now, not from fear, but from disbelief. She had led troops in high-risk zones. She had stood in rooms where world decisions were made. Yet here she was, being treated like a threat in a grocery store parking lot. "I assure you," she said evenly, "there must be some misunderstanding." The second officer returned. "Plate checks out." The first officer looked at her again. "We need to verify some information." She nodded. "I'm happy to cooperate." But something in the air had already shifted. The officers were no longer asking questions. They were commanding. "Turn around," one said. She hesitated only for a second. "Am I being detained?" "Turn around," he repeated. The crowd grew quieter. Someone whispered, "What's happening?" She slowly turned around. Her mind raced, but her training took over. Stay composed. Do not escalate. Breathe. Cold metal cuffs snapped around her wrists. A small gasp came from the onlookers. This is unnecessary, she said, keeping her voice steady. Just procedure, the officer replied. Procedure. The word echoed in her mind. She had written procedures. She had enforced standards. She knew what proper conduct looked like. This did not feel like it. They guided her toward the patrol car. The cuffs were tight, pressing into her skin. She did not resist. She did not raise her voice. She simply walked with dignity, aware that every movement mattered. As they placed her in the back seat, she caught sight of a young girl standing near her mother. The child's eyes were wide with confusion. That look stayed with her. Inside the patrol car, the door shut firmly. The outside noise became muted. She sat upright, hands behind her, staring forward. Her thoughts were not angry. They were focused. She replayed the events carefully, like reviewing footage after a mission. A phone call, an assumption, escalation without evidence. Through the window, she could see one officer speaking with the man who had made the call. The man pointed toward her car, shaking his head as if confirming something. She closed her eyes briefly. This was not about a parking spot or a vehicle. It was about perception. About someone deciding she did not belong. Minutes passed. Felt longer. The officer returned to the car and opened the door slightly. We're going to sort this out at the station. She nodded. May I ask on what grounds? Further verification. She held his gaze. I have identification. The vehicle registration matches. He avoided eye contact. We'll handle it downtown. The door closed again. As the car began to move, she straightened her shoulders. She had faced harder days. She had endured greater pressure. But this felt personal in a different way. A few cars followed behind, perhaps curious. A bystander's phone camera remained pointed toward the patrol car until it turned the corner. At a red light, she looked at her reflection in the partition glass. She did not see a criminal. She saw a leader, a woman who had spent her life earning respect through service. She whispered quietly to herself, "Stay steady." When they arrived at the station, the cuffs were finally removed, though no apology followed. She rubbed her wrists gently but kept her posture firm. Inside, the fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. An officer at the desk looked up casually, then did a double take as he read her identification more carefully. There was a slight pause. The officer's eyebrows rose. He typed something into the computer, then typed again, slower this time. The arresting officer stood nearby, arms crossed. She stood quietly, hands now resting at her sides. The desk officer cleared his throat. Ma'am, can you confirm your full title? She answered calmly, her voice measured and clear. Silence followed. The mood in the room shifted, subtle but noticeable. The air felt heavier. One of the arresting officers shifted his weight. The desk officer stared at the screen longer than necessary. She did not smile. She did not gloat. She simply waited. Outside, the sun continued to shine as if nothing unusual had happened. Cars drove by. People finished their errands. Life moved forward. Inside the station, however, something important had begun. What started as an ordinary afternoon had turned into a moment that would not stay quiet. Phones would ring. Questions would be asked. Policies would be reviewed. But for now, she stood there calmly, her dignity intact. She had been handcuffed without cause, assumed guilty without evidence. Yet she had not lost her composure. And that, more than anything else, was what would matter next. She waited quietly in the small office of the police station. The fluorescent lights flickered slightly overhead, casting a cold glow over the room. The handcuffs had been removed, but the tension in the air had not. She stood with her back straight, hands folded calmly in front of her. Every step, every movement was deliberate. She had learned long ago that composure could speak louder than words. In her decades of service, she had faced far worse situations, but this was different. This was unexpected. This was personal in a quiet, unsettling way. The desk officer typed something quickly into the computer, glancing at the screen every few seconds. Her ID and credentials had already been entered, but now there was a pause. The officer leaned back slightly, as if reconsidering something. She could see him struggle, trying to make sense of the situation. She said nothing, only observed. Observation was a tool she had honed through countless missions. She could read tension, fear, hesitation, and uncertainty, even in strangers. Finally, he cleared his throat. "Ma'am, we need to verify your identity further. There are some questions about your credentials." She nodded calmly. "I understand. Please proceed." The words were simple, but her tone carried authority. It was not arrogance. It was experience. Years of leading men and women, making decisions under pressure, and staying composed in tense moments had built a presence that commanded attention without demanding it. One of the arresting officers shifted uncomfortably. He avoided eye contact, his earlier confidence now replaced by unease. The other leaned against the wall, arms crossed, jaw tight. The shift in the room was subtle but undeniable. She did not gloat or point out their mistakes. That was unnecessary. The truth had a way of revealing itself without interference. She asked politely, "Would it help if I made a call to confirm my position?" The desk officer hesitated. "A call?" "Yes," she said, steady and clear. "I can contact a senior official at the Pentagon. They can verify my identity and my current assignment." The officer's eyes widened slightly. We'll need to see if that's allowed." She smiled faintly, not a mocking smile, just calm. "It is allowed, and it will clarify everything." Minutes passed. The officers fumbled with phones and forms. The air in the room felt heavier with each passing second. The bystanders from the parking lot had moved on, but the weight of being judged unfairly lingered. She did not let it affect her outward demeanor, but internally, she catalogued every detail. Every expression, every movement, every word spoken mattered. This was not just about her. It was about how assumptions could spiral into injustice. Finally, she was handed the phone. She dialed a secure number she had memorized, her voice calm and deliberate. "This is the general at your office. I am currently being held at a local station. I need verification of my credentials." The voice on the other end responded immediately, professional and direct. Within moments, confirmations were being made. The conversation was brief, precise, and factual. No anger, no accusations, just facts clearly stated. She handed the phone back to the desk officer, who now looked flustered, unable to hide his surprise. "There," she said softly. "All necessary verification has been made." The officer stared at the screen, then at her. "Ma'am, this is real?" "Yes," she said simply. "All of it." The room fell silent. The two arresting officers shifted uncomfortably. Confidence had left the room. It was replaced with something heavier, uncertainty, guilt, and the dawning realization that assumptions had led to this mistake. The desk officer cleared his throat. "I will need to contact the chief immediately." She nodded. "I would recommend that." As the phone calls began, she remained composed. Every so often, she caught the eye of one of the officers and held it briefly, calm but unwavering. She was not there to humiliate anyone. She was there to ensure that truth and fairness prevailed. A few minutes later, the police chief entered the room. His face was tight, his steps purposeful. The murmured conversations stopped instantly. He looked around, noticing the two officers standing off to the side, tension in their bodies. Then he focused on her. "Ma'am," he said, a formal tone attempting to mask his urgency. "I understand there has been a misunderstanding." She nodded once. "Yes, sir. A misunderstanding that escalated unnecessarily." The chief swallowed. "Can you explain?" She did calmly. She recounted the events in the parking lot, the brief conversation with the caller, and the manner in which the officers had approached her. She did not raise her voice. She did not accuse. She simply stated facts one by one. Each fact landed quietly but unmistakably in the room. The officers who had handcuffed her shifted under the weight of her words. There was no denying them. They had made assumptions based on appearance, and those assumptions had led to actions that should never have occurred. The chief listened intently, occasionally glancing at the officers. By the end of her explanation, the chief exhaled slowly. I see. This is serious. I will handle it immediately. She nodded again. I trust that you will. The chief picked up the phone and made several calls. His voice was firm, direct, and urgent. He was clearly communicating with someone higher in command, and the tension in the room grew as officers waited. They had never imagined that one simple call from a senior official could ripple so quickly. Meanwhile, she remained silent, observing everything. The atmosphere in the station had shifted from control to caution. The officers who had been aggressive before now hesitated to speak. The weight of accountability had entered the room. After a few more minutes, the chief turned to her. Ma'am, you will be released immediately. I apologize for this mistake. She smiled faintly, dignified. Thank you. I hope this serves as a learning moment for the department. The handcuffs were removed again, this time permanently. She rubbed her wrists gently, feeling the pressure marks fade. She did not raise her voice or demand an apology beyond the words given. Her presence alone conveyed a sense of authority that words could not match. Once free, she gathered her belongings and prepared to leave. The officers who had caused the misunderstanding stood silently, clearly shaken. One of them tried to speak but stopped, unsure what to say. Silence was enough. Silence acknowledged accountability without unnecessary confrontation. Before leaving, she spoke again, addressing the room. Every person, regardless of appearance, deserves to be treated with respect and fairness. Policies are important, but human judgment matters more. I hope this situation reminds everyone here to pause before acting. Her words were measured, firm, and without malice. The officers listened, their postures tense, their minds processing the lesson. Outside, the sun continued to shine. Cars moved along the streets, and life went on as usual. But inside the station, a quiet shift had occurred. Assumptions had been challenged. Accountability had begun. And a lesson in dignity, calm, and truth had been delivered in the most unusual of classrooms. A police station on an ordinary afternoon. As she walked to her car, she noticed a few bystanders still lingering near the sidewalk. They nodded respectfully, some capturing photos quietly on their phones. She smiled faintly but did not stop. Her focus remained on the lesson of the day. Actions have consequences. Composure commands respect. Truth, when delivered calmly and clearly, cannot be ignored. Sitting in her car, she allowed herself a deep breath. The situation was far from over. Investigations would follow. Careers could be affected. Policies might change. But she had handled the moment as she always did. With discipline, patience, and dignity. She started the engine and drove slowly away, blending into the flow of traffic. The neighborhood was peaceful once again, unaware of the storm that had quietly passed through its parking lot. She thought of her team overseas, the lessons she had taught, and the values she had lived by. Those same lessons had guided her through this moment. Calm in the face of injustice. Authority without aggression. Presence without arrogance. The call she had made to the Pentagon would not just verify her identity. It would set in motion a chain of events that would demand accountability. Those who acted hastily would face consequences, and the lessons would spread beyond this small station. But she did not focus on punishment. She focused on the principle. Fairness, respect, and truth could not be denied. As the car disappeared around the corner, the officers left behind could only stare after her. They had learned, in an unspoken way, the weight of assumptions. They had seen the power of composure, and they had faced the beginning of a reckoning they could not escape. The quiet afternoon had changed everything, not through shouting or confrontation, but through a calm, steady presence that refused to be shaken. The truth had begun to surface, and it would not be ignored. The moment she walked out of the small interview room, the atmosphere in the station had shifted. The officers who had handled her case earlier no longer carried the same confident air. Instead, there was unease, tension, and a hint of embarrassment that hung in the room like thick smoke. She had said very little, but her presence and calm words had spoken volumes. Truth has a quiet power, and she had let it do the work for her. She was led to a larger office where the police chief was waiting. His steps were measured but brisk. There was an urgency in the air that hadn't existed before. She did not rush. Her posture remained straight, shoulders squared, hands relaxed at her sides. Years of leading others had taught her that control over oneself often affects control over the situation. The chief stood in front of her, trying to maintain composure, but his eyes betrayed his anxiety. "I understand that this situation has caused unnecessary stress," he began, choosing his words carefully. We want to make things right." She nodded. "I appreciate that. I trust that accountability will follow." He motioned for the officers to step aside. They did, some still avoiding eye contact, others fidgeting, clearly uncomfortable with the reality of what had happened. The chief gestured for her to take a seat. She remained standing. Some lessons are better delivered while standing. "Can you walk me through exactly what happened outside?" the chief asked. She did. Every word was deliberate, calm, and clear. She described the mundane events at the store, the man who had watched her, and the way the officers approached. She did not embellish. She did not allow emotion to cloud the facts. She spoke of movements, words exchanged, and her own responses, emphasizing that at no point had she behaved aggressively or in a threatening manner. The chief listened intently, occasionally glancing at the officers, who shifted under his gaze. He looked at them and then back at her, his lips pressing together in a tight line. As she spoke, it became impossible to ignore what had happened. Their actions were not just misguided, they were preventable. After she finished recounting the events, she paused. "This isn't about punishment for the sake of punishment," she said softly. "It's about ensuring that no one else is treated unfairly. Procedures exist to guide decisions, but judgment matters. Human judgment must be exercised carefully." The chief swallowed. I see that now. It's clear this escalated unnecessarily. I will make calls immediately to address this at every level." She nodded once, her expression calm but firm. "I recommend contacting Internal Affairs and reviewing body camera footage as soon as possible. Transparency is essential." Phones began ringing. The chief picked up his desk phone, and soon a series of conversations were underway. She could hear parts of the dialogue, urgent, measured, and professional. Within minutes, other officers entered the room, followed by a legal advisor. They were there to document the incident and begin the formal process of review. The two officers who had originally handcuffed her stood near the wall, faces pale and tight. Every time the conversation referenced their actions, their discomfort grew. One of them looked like he wanted to speak but did not know what words could undo the situation. Their earlier confidence was gone. They now understood in stark detail the consequences of assumptions and hasty decisions. She did not gloat. She did not need to. Her calm authority was enough to underscore the lesson. She allowed the chief and legal staff to take the lead. She only clarified when necessary and offered insights into the proper chain of verification, explaining how a simple call to her superiors could have prevented the entire ordeal. A few officers outside the immediate room paused to watch. Some had smartphones in hand, curious about the commotion. She did not react to the observers. She had learned long ago that attention was fleeting, and composure mattered more than an audience. Minutes turned into an hour. The chief had made calls to the highest levels of local command, and news of the verification from the Pentagon had begun to circulate. Officers and staff moved with a new urgency, double-checking every detail of her identification, cross-referencing ranks, and ensuring that every fact was properly documented. She stood quietly, observing everything. Her mind catalogued the events. This was not just about the individual officers who had acted without proper judgment. It was about a system that allowed assumptions to replace verification. It was about a culture that needed reminders that fairness and respect were not optional. Finally, the chief addressed the room again. Effective immediately, The officers involved will be placed on administrative leave pending further investigation. This is necessary to ensure an unbiased review of the situation and to maintain public trust. One of the officers swallowed hard, clearly understanding the gravity of the announcement. They had believed the situation would end quietly. They had believed appearances and assumptions could carry weight. Now, every choice they had made, every hasty decision was under scrutiny. She nodded once, acknowledging the chief's words. That is appropriate. Transparency and accountability are not negotiable. Every person deserves to be treated with dignity, and those entrusted to enforce the law must remember that. The chief picked up a pen and began writing notes, occasionally glancing at her to confirm details. The room was silent except for the scratching of pen on paper, punctuated by quiet murmurs from other staff. This was a room being reshaped by truth, calm authority, and undeniable facts. A legal advisor spoke up. We will need to review the footage from all cameras, interview witnesses, and prepare a full report. Given the rank and public interest, this will be a high-priority case. She nodded. I am available to provide any necessary statements. My goal is not attention, but clarity. Accuracy is more important than emotion. The chief exhaled slowly, visibly relieved that the situation was finally being addressed with the seriousness it deserved. Thank you for your patience. Your professionalism has made it possible for us to handle this appropriately. She smiled faintly, not with pride, but with acknowledgement of the work that had just begun. Professionalism is a standard. It is expected in every situation. I hope this is a reminder for everyone here. The two officers who had initially handcuffed her were led out of the room to begin the administrative process. She watched them leave, knowing that the consequences were just beginning. Careers that had seemed stable were now under review. Policies would be rewritten. Training programs would be scrutinized. And above all, the lesson of composure, verification, and respect would resonate far beyond this one incident. After they were gone, she was allowed a brief moment of quiet. She leaned back against the wall and closed her eyes. She could feel the tension in her own body begin to ease, though her mind remained sharp. This situation had been a test, not of her abilities, but of how systems respond when assumptions replace facts. And she had proven, through patience and dignity, that truth could not be ignored. Outside the room, she could hear officers discussing new protocols, confirming her rank, and carefully reviewing policies. The station, once casual and routine, was now alive with a sense of urgency and reflection. Every person who had been involved or nearby would remember this day. They would remember that one call, one verification, could change the course of events. They would remember that calm and truth carried a weight no aggression could match. She straightened her shoulders and prepared to leave the office. The chief approached again. Ma'am, the process is underway. You will be notified of every development. I assure you, this will not be ignored. I trust that it will not, she said simply. That is what matters most. The room fell silent as she turned to walk toward the exit. She did not rush, but her movements were deliberate, commanding respect without a word. Staff and officers watched quietly. Some had cameras or phones ready, but she paid no attention. She had learned long ago that the presence of others does not dictate behavior, principle does. Stepping into the sunlight outside the station, she felt the warmth on her face and the light breeze. The city moved on as usual, cars passing, pedestrians walking, life continuing. But the events that had unfolded would ripple far beyond this small moment. The lesson was clear. Accountability cannot be avoided, and composure in the face of misunderstanding is a powerful force. Her phone buzzed with a brief message from the Pentagon confirming that they had been informed and that her verification call had been logged. She read it calmly, tucked the phone away, and took a deep breath. The ordeal was far from over, but she had set the tone. Truth had been recognized. Procedures would be reviewed. Careers and reputations would face scrutiny. And the officers who had acted without proper judgment would now understand the consequences of their actions. As she walked to her car, a few bystanders who had noticed the commotion nodded respectfully. She returned the gesture with the faintest of smiles, not for attention, but as acknowledgement of shared humanity. The day had been difficult, but dignity had prevailed. She had remained composed while chaos unfolded around her, and that quiet strength would be remembered far longer than the initial misjudgment. She started the engine and drove slowly through the streets, thinking not of anger or revenge, but of what needed to happen next. The system needed correction. Lessons needed to be learned. And above all, fairness and respect needed to guide future actions. This was more than an isolated incident. It was a reminder that assumptions could lead to injustice, and that calm, measured response could bring truth to light. She had shown that leadership is not just about commanding in the field, it is about standing firm when confronted with error and misunderstanding, and insisting that fairness and accountability are not optional. By the time she reached her destination, the station was already beginning the formal processes of review. Calls had been made, investigations were underway, and the ripple of her quiet strength had begun to spread. She stepped out of the car, shoulders squared, and walked forward knowing that the work of accountability had begun. The moment had shifted from personal injustice to a larger movement toward truth and fairness, and she had guided it with steady, unwavering resolve. This was a victory not in noise or confrontation, but in composure, clarity, and principle, and it would not be forgotten. The investigation began immediately, moving faster than most could have imagined. Once the call to the Pentagon verified her identity, the local police department understood the gravity of the situation. The officers involved in handcuffing her were placed on administrative leave, their routines disrupted in a way that made the reality of their actions undeniable. For the first time, they faced consequences that were personal, visible, and inevitable. The first step was reviewing body camera footage. Every angle, every second was analyzed. The video clearly showed how the situation had escalated unnecessarily. From the moment she approached her car, moving slowly to reach for her identification, the officers had jumped to conclusions. Their gestures, their tones, the unnecessary commands, they were all captured in high definition. It was irrefutable. The general's calmness stood out against the officer's tension. She did not resist. She did not shout. She did not argue. She had followed instructions, answered questions clearly, and remained composed even when the situation turned hostile. The footage became a study in professionalism under pressure, and it contrasted sharply with the impulsive actions of the officers. Investigators also interviewed bystanders, including those who had filmed the incident. Their statements were consistent. The general had been polite, patient, and unthreatening. People had been shocked by the sudden handcuffing, but no one had seen her behave in a way that could justify such treatment. Their accounts further reinforced the discrepancy between her actions and the officer's response. Within the department, the internal affairs team began compiling reports. Each officer's history was reviewed. Any previous complaints, disciplinary records, and reports of misconduct were examined carefully. The investigation uncovered small warnings from past incidents, behavior that, while not severe on its own, showed a pattern of making assumptions without verification. Combined with this incident, the pattern painted a concerning picture. The general continued her normal duties, but now the focus was broader. Her goal was not revenge, nor was it personal satisfaction. She wanted accountability. She wanted the system to work as it was intended. She wanted training protocols reviewed, officers reminded of the importance of human judgment, and policies strengthened to prevent similar situations from occurring in the future. Within days, the department announced formal disciplinary actions. The officers involved faced consequences that varied depending on their roles and prior histories. Some were suspended indefinitely, pending further review. Others were permanently removed from active duty. A few chose to resign rather than face formal action, understanding the weight of public scrutiny and the implications for their careers. The announcement caused ripples beyond the local department. News outlets began reporting the story, highlighting the general's calm demeanor and professionalism. Videos of the incident went viral. Social media users expressed outrage, admiration, and support for her. Many noted how unusual it was for someone of such high rank to be treated so poorly in a civilian context, and how remarkable her restraint had been. At the department, the chief implemented mandatory bias and de-escalation training for all officers. The curriculum emphasized respect, verification, and the importance of observing facts before making judgments. The general's experience was used as a case study, showing both the consequences of assumptions and the power of composure. Officers were asked to reflect on their actions, discuss alternatives, and learn from the incident. Legal advisors became involved, reviewing civil rights implications. They ensured that the actions of the officers, as captured on video, were evaluated against laws and regulations. The potential for civil litigation was high, and the department needed to act quickly to mitigate damage and restore public trust. Every memo, every email, and every report was documented meticulously. Within the general's circle, there was a quiet sense of respect for how she had handled the situation. Colleagues remarked on her calmness, how she had turned a personal injustice into a teaching moment. She had not reacted with anger or threats. She had used her composure to highlight flaws in the system to ensure that fairness prevailed. Her ability to remain steady under scrutiny inspired those who knew her best. The officers involved were forced to confront their actions. The reality was stark. Careers that had once seemed secure were now uncertain. Some officers faced formal reprimands that would follow them for the rest of their professional lives. Others had to explain their actions to legal authorities, the public, and peers. The weight of consequences became real in ways that rumors, warnings, or private regrets could never replicate. Community response was strong. Local organizations held meetings to discuss the incident, emphasizing the need for accountability, fairness, and respect in law enforcement. Public forums invited input from residents, leaders, and activists. The general's case became a touchstone for larger conversations about bias, authority, and the responsibility of those in power to act with care. Through it all, she remained focused on her work. She did not seek attention or public validation. Her priority was ensuring that lessons were learned and that the system improved. She communicated with leaders quietly, providing insights and recommendations to prevent similar incidents. Her approach was practical, grounded in experience, and committed to long-term change rather than short-term satisfaction. Weeks later, the Internal Affairs report was released publicly. The report detailed the officers' misjudgments, procedural failures, and lack of adherence to proper verification processes. Recommendations were made for disciplinary action, policy updates, and mandatory training programs. The department committed to implementing these recommendations fully, demonstrating a willingness to learn from the incident. The general's role in the process was acknowledged by the department. While she had not demanded recognition, her actions had forced accountability. Her call to the Pentagon had not been a mere formality. It had been a turning point that ensured the truth could not be ignored. She had turned an unjust situation into an opportunity for systemic improvement, and her presence had ensured that fairness was restored. In the wider community, her story became an example of how calm, principled action can bring about change. People discussed her restraint, her professionalism, and the impact of her actions on the officers involved. Some shared their own experiences of being misjudged, finding hope in how she handled herself. Others reflected on the importance of speaking truth to power, even when it is uncomfortable or risky. Inside the department, the changes were tangible. Training programs were revised, policies were clarified, and officers received regular reminders of the importance of verification, respect, and composure. Supervisors monitored interactions more closely, ensuring that assumptions were challenged before action was taken. The culture, while not perfect, had shifted subtly toward accountability and awareness. The officers who had acted impulsively faced a future they had not anticipated. Public scrutiny, formal reprimands, and loss of trust marked a turning point in their careers. Some would leave the profession entirely. Others would remain, but the memory of the incident and its consequences would influence their future actions. For them, the lesson was profound. Assumptions, when left unchecked, can have consequences that reach far beyond a single moment. The general returned to her regular duties, quietly continuing her work. She did not dwell on the incident, though she remained aware of its significance. Every interaction, every decision, and every policy change she influenced reflected the principle that fairness, patience, and calm authority are more powerful than anger or aggression. She had turned an unjust moment into a lesson that would be remembered by those involved, by the community, and by the department itself. As weeks turned into months, the officers' situations were resolved. Some faced termination. Others received formal discipline and retraining. Policies were rewritten. Training programs were strengthened. The department had been forced to confront uncomfortable truths, and it had responded. The ripple effect of her composure and professionalism extended beyond the station, reaching city leaders, community organizations, and the public. In the quiet of her office, she reflected on the incident. She had faced unexpected challenges, yet she had remained calm, measured, and principled. Her actions had not been about punishment, they had been about fairness. She had turned a moment of personal injustice into an opportunity for systemic improvement, and in doing so, she had set an example for others to follow. The story of the incident would be remembered not for the handcuffs, the mistaken assumptions, or the initial injustice, but for the power of calm authority, clear communication, and unwavering commitment to truth. Her presence had reminded everyone involved that dignity and composure could change outcomes, inspire reflection, and influence a system that too often acted without pause. She continued her work quietly, aware that change takes time, patience, and consistent effort. The officers who had faltered had learned lessons they could not forget. The department had begun a process of reflection and improvement, and the community had witnessed, in a small but powerful way, the impact of a person who refused to compromise on principles, even when confronted with error and misunderstanding. By the end of the month, the ripple of the incident had reached beyond the immediate department. Leaders in nearby agencies reviewed their own protocols, considering how similar situations could be avoided. Training programs emphasized verification, respect, and the importance of observation. The story had become a case study in professional conduct, accountability, and leadership. For her, the incident was now a memory, a moment in time that had tested patience and composure, but had ultimately reinforced the principles she had lived by for decades. She had not sought recognition, but recognition had followed naturally. Her actions had shaped outcomes far beyond what any single report or video could capture. She had reminded the world, and those in positions of authority, that fairness, calm, and dignity are more powerful than assumption, aggression, or haste. The officers affected by the incident would carry the lesson with them for the rest of their careers. The department, its policies, and its culture had shifted because of one moment, one call, and one person's refusal to compromise on principle. The public had witnessed accountability in action, and she, through quiet strength and steady resolve, had ensured that the truth would not be ignored. The incident would fade from daily headlines, but the effects of accountability, reflection, and procedural reform would remain. Her story was now a reference point, a reminder that even in moments of misunderstanding, calm, measured action could create lasting impact. She had not only corrected a personal injustice, but had contributed to a broader culture of awareness, fairness, and respect that would endure far beyond a single afternoon in a parking lot. Her work continued, as always, guided by principle, experience, and quiet authority. She had faced unexpected adversity and had emerged with integrity intact. The lesson was clear. The right action, taken calmly and consistently, has the power to change systems, influence people, and create a lasting legacy that no misunderstanding or mistake can erase. The weeks that followed were filled with reflection, change, and quiet acknowledgement. The general returned to her regular duties at the Pentagon, resuming the responsibilities she had carried for decades. Her work was demanding, involving meetings, planning, and overseeing missions that affected thousands of lives. Yet, in her mind, the lessons from that ordinary afternoon lingered. The incident had started as a personal injustice but had grown into something much larger, an opportunity to influence systems, people, and culture in ways that few moments in life could. She moved through her days with her usual focus, attending briefings, reviewing reports, and mentoring her team. Every decision she made was deliberate, informed by years of experience and an unshakable sense of principle. But even as she performed her duties, she noticed subtle changes around her. Colleagues who had heard of the incident treated her with a quiet respect that went beyond her rank. Not because of fear or deference, but because of what she represented, a calm, measured approach to challenges that others often mishandled with haste or emotion. News of the police department's actions had spread beyond the city. Local media had covered the story, highlighting her composure and the accountability that followed. National outlets picked it up, emphasizing how one person's professionalism could create change. Videos from the parking lot and the police station went viral, but the general herself had not sought attention. She did not give interviews. She did not post statements on social media. Her influence was silent, yet undeniable. Community leaders began inviting her to speak at public forums, schools, and local events. They wanted her to share insights about leadership, composure under pressure, and the importance of fairness. She accepted selectively, speaking with clarity and humility. She did not frame herself as a hero, nor did she dwell on the injustice she had endured. Instead, she focused on principles. The responsibility to remain calm when confronted with error, the importance of verifying facts before acting, and the need to treat every individual with dignity. Her speeches inspired many, particularly young women and people of color. They shared how her experience had shown them the power of patience, calm authority, and professional integrity. Some recounted times when they had been misjudged, and they found hope in the way she had handled herself. Her story became more than a single incident. It became a blueprint for resilience and ethical leadership. Back at the police department, the changes were tangible. The officers who had acted without verification faced formal disciplinary actions. Some were terminated. Others underwent extensive retraining in bias awareness, de-escalation, and proper verification processes. The department's leadership implemented new policies to prevent assumptions from turning into misconduct. Training sessions were now mandatory for all officers, emphasizing patience, observation, and respect. The ripple effect of her composure was transforming the culture from within. The general's own team at the Pentagon took notice. They admired not just her professionalism, but her ability to turn a personal injustice into a lesson that benefited others. She remained humble, emphasizing that the principles she followed were universal. She often said that true leadership was not about reaction, but about measured response, and about ensuring that the systems one worked within upheld justice, fairness, and respect. Even in casual conversations, she reminded colleagues that every action has consequences. A small mistake, an assumption, or a rush to judgment can ripple far beyond what one might anticipate. Her own experience in the parking lot, the handcuffing, and the subsequent investigation was a vivid example. She used it not to shame individuals, but to teach lessons about awareness, accountability, and the importance of remaining calm under pressure. The public forum discussions grew broader, touching on issues of bias, authority, and systemic change. She spoke of her hope that law enforcement agencies across the country would learn from this incident, not just in policy, but in culture. It was not enough to write new rules. People had to understand the human consequences of assumptions. They had to respect the dignity of every person they encountered. Her calls and guidance helped implement nationwide training improvements. Officers who had once acted without pause now faced structured programs emphasizing verification, patience, and community engagement. Departments began using her case as a study, showing how one incident handled properly could lead to lasting systemic improvement. The story became a touchstone for teaching leadership, ethics, and accountability. Meanwhile, the officers who had been involved learned difficult lessons. Their careers were forever affected. Some had to leave law enforcement entirely, others were demoted, and a few faced public reprimand. They had believed that authority alone could carry weight, but they discovered the limits of unchecked judgment. The consequences were real, public, and lasting. The lesson had been hard but necessary, and it demonstrated that even small actions can have profound results. The The general continued to fulfill her duties at the Pentagon without fanfare. She knew that her work, mentoring, planning, and guiding missions had far-reaching consequences beyond the incident. Yet, she also understood the importance of symbolic victories. Her calm response, her verification call, and her insistence on fairness had changed the trajectory of lives, careers, and systems. At military academies and training centers, her story became an example. Young officers and cadets learned about leadership under pressure, the importance of patience, and the impact of principle over impulse. They studied her conduct not as a tale of victimhood, but as a blueprint for influence and integrity. She had shown that strength is quiet, and influence comes from clarity, dignity, and action rooted in principle. Months later, the city held a public forum on community and law enforcement relations. The general was invited to speak. She stood before a crowded auditorium, facing students, officers, and residents. Her speech was concise, thoughtful, and human-centered. She emphasized that accountability should never be selective, that verification and patience could prevent injustice, and that respect for human dignity is the foundation of trust in any institution. Her words resonated deeply. People nodded, some with tears in their eyes, recognizing both the courage and the restraint she had demonstrated. She did not speak of revenge or anger. She spoke of fairness, principle, and the power of steady resolve. By the end of her speech, there was a sense of shared purpose in the room, a reminder that small actions can create wide-reaching impact when guided by principle. At the Pentagon, colleagues and superiors quietly acknowledged her contribution beyond the public incident. She had turned personal adversity into a tool for systemic improvement. She had shown that leadership is not only about authority or rank, but also about the ability to act with dignity and calm under pressure. She had modeled behavior that influenced individuals, policies, and institutions simultaneously. The ripple effect reached far beyond her immediate environment. Cities across the country examined police protocols, training programs, and accountability measures. Departments emphasized human judgment and respect, ensuring that mistakes like those in the parking lot would be less likely to happen. The incident had become a catalyst for change, initiated by one person's insistence on fairness and clear communication. Even in her private moments, she reflected on the experience. She did not dwell on anger, resentment, or frustration. Instead, she focused on lessons learned, both personally and institutionally. She thought about the officers, the department, and the public. She considered the young people who might see her example and learn to handle challenges with patience, integrity, and calm authority. Her influence extended to mentoring sessions, team briefings, and informal conversations. She spoke about composure in moments of injustice, about the importance of observation before action, and about accountability as a cornerstone of leadership. Her words were practical, grounded, and relatable. She connected experiences to principle, demonstrating that ethical behavior is not abstract. It is lived, daily, in small and large decisions alike. Months turned into a year. The incident faded from daily news, but the changes it inspired endured. Officers trained differently. Departments monitored interactions more carefully. Communities engaged with law enforcement in new ways. And through it all, the general remained a quiet force for principle, demonstrating that influence is measured not by volume, but by integrity, calm, and steady action. The officers who had caused the incident carried its lessons with them, as did the department. Some never forgot the face of someone who had been misjudged and yet remained composed and dignified. Others used the story to train new recruits, ensuring that the mistakes of the past would not repeat. The general's impact reached far beyond one day, one parking lot, and one set of actions. It became a model of leadership, fairness, and integrity that would resonate for years. Even as she continued her daily work, the memory of that day remained. It reminded her that principle always matters, that patience and dignity are powerful tools, and that standing firm in the truth can influence individuals and systems alike. Her calm, professional response had not just corrected a personal injustice. It had sparked a wave of accountability and reflection that improved processes, policies, and lives. She moved through her days with a quiet sense of satisfaction. Not satisfaction in recognition or acclaim, but in knowing that her actions had made a difference. The world had seen what calm authority, clear communication, and steadfast integrity could achieve. Careers had been corrected, policies had changed, and communities had learned lessons in fairness and respect. In the end, the incident became a story of influence rather than conflict. It showed that one person, by remaining composed, principled, and professional, could reshape outcomes, affect institutions, and inspire others. She had demonstrated that strength is not loud, that leadership is not about domination, and that true power lies in integrity, clarity, and unwavering commitment to fairness. She continued her service, quietly, consistently, and with dignity. The lessons of that afternoon were woven into her daily actions. Every decision, every conversation, and every interaction reflected the principle that had guided her through the entire ordeal. Fairness, respect, and calm authority can change more than moments. They can change systems, lives, and legacies. The ripple of her actions would continue, quietly shaping those who witnessed, learned, and remembered. Careers had been affected, policies had been reformed, and communities had gained perspective. And through it all, she remained the same, calm, principled, and steadfast. A living reminder that dignity and integrity are the most powerful forces in any moment of adversity. Her story, though centered on one incident, became a lesson far larger than herself. It showed that courage is often quiet, influence is often subtle, and change is possible when truth, patience, and fairness guide every step. The officers who had acted hastily learned that assumptions carry weight. The department learned that accountability is essential. And the public learned that composure and principle can make injustice visible and preventable. In the end, she had not just endured. She had taught, guided, and inspired. She had turned a single moment of misjudgment into a long-lasting impact, proving that true leadership is measured not by power over others, but by the ability to shape actions, systems, and lives through clarity, integrity, and quiet strength.